Okay, everybody, Ken Newhouse here. I want to welcome you to this episode of the Get Clients Now podcast. And today we have a very special guest, someone who almost didn't make it onto the show due to no fault of her own, and that is multiple best-time selling author, Lisa Cron. Lisa, I want to welcome you on behalf of myself and the members of Get Clients Now Nation. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
It's fabulous to be here. These days, everything is virtual, so it's like everybody's communicating right now as opposed to just us.
Yes, I'm actually used to it because we do this with the show all the time. But, Lisa, I had actually sent I think it was on your website where I filled out I read both of your books. I'm looking forward to the third book, which is coming out in March of 2021. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But I read Wired for Story, fabulous book. I read Story Genius, which takes it to a whole nother level, which is just an absolute literary masterpiece, I guess, if I say that correctly. Listen, if you want to learn how to write stories or tell stories, and that's my whole gig, is I want to learn how to tell better stories and writing as well, not for the sake of a novel, but these are just masterpieces. But I sent an email to Lisa and I said, hey, listen, we're doing a series on the whole topic of stories. Had all these other experts on, but Lisa, as I told you before, you were like the pinnacle of the people that I wanted to get. You were the top dog. And I say that lovingly and respectfully and very professionally. And I didn't hear back from Lisa. And then that was in December. And then like 2 months later, I got an email that said, hey, by the way, I did respond to you. I would love to be on your show. And I'm like, what? I'm like, who's this? And it was you. So thank you for not giving up on me. And thank you for picking up the slack and doing the show.
I'm very happy to be here.
So let's do this. I've got a couple questions. Mm-hmm. Obviously I've covered your bio in the introduction, but I've got a couple questions that I ask every guest. So if you could take a minute or two, just give us enough of your backstory so we kind of make sense of the show today. Some people obviously aren't going to know who you are. I think most people do know who you are in my audience. They're prolific readers for the most part. And so I've already mentioned your book. I don't know how many times, like a bazillion times, both of your books on previous episodes. Because they're just that good. I like to share with our members the books that I read. But if you could give us a little backstory, tell us what we need to know about you that got you from at any point you want to start to the point of being one of the most well-known leading experts in the entire world on how to write killer, fabulous, awesome stories, how to tell a story.
Okay. Here's the thing. When I started, I've loved stories since I was a little kid. Really a little kid. Going way back when I was 12, I decided to see every movie that was ever made. And I did for a long time. And when I left college, I wanted actually to be a writer. And to tell you the truth, I didn't have the courage. I didn't know what to do. So I went into publishing, which I loved. So I was in publishing for a while, and I worked at W.W. Norton. And at that point, anybody who wanted to could also be a reader. Like we could also take home manuscripts and read them. And so I did that as well. And I started to notice that what made a good writer, what I thought made a good novel or memoir, was the opposite. And that was really interesting. What was grabbing me, what pulled me in, had very little to do with anything I'd ever been taught about story. It actually had to do with the way the characters were making sense of what was going on. And if that wasn't happening, if I couldn't feel what they were feeling based on what they were going through on the page, it didn't matter what was happening. It didn't matter how beautifully it was written. It didn't matter about the great big giant things that were happening in the plot. In fact, Birth, Death, Fall of the Roman Empire, it could be shockingly boring to the place where you think, like, is there something wrong with me that I'm not, moved by, people being mowed down? So kind of once I went into that, the rest of my career, up to when I actually started writing about it, was doing the same thing. I worked in television production. I then worked reading books to film for Warner Brothers and for the William Morris Agency back before they joined with Endeavor. And it was exactly the same thing. At that point, I was reading thousands of manuscripts, and I would have to do, most of you guys, if you started to read what I was reading, you'd go, okay, yeah, forget it, and you'd put it down. I had to read it to the end.
Oh, no.
To say why it did, or way more likely, didn't work. And that's when I really started to see and really started to, for lack of a better term, codify what it was that was pulling me in. And at that point, I sort of thought of it as, well, this is like my theory. And lucky for me, serendipity of all of it is that neuroscience was really taking off at that point.
Sweet.
And I was fascinated by, like, how does the brain work? Like, because as they say, writers were the first neuroscientists. There's a book, I think it's Jonah Lehrer, who's Fallen from Grace, and I think the title of one of his books was Proust is the First Neuroscientist. And it's true, because neuroscientists and writers and you guys are really trying to figure out what makes people tick. What are we really thinking? What do we really mean when we say what we say? And that's what stories do. That's what neuroscience does. And by studying the neuroscience, it was easy to see that, wait a minute, what I thought as my theory turned out to be biological fact. And I cannot begin to tell you how thrilling that was.
I can imagine. That's awesome.
The most thrilling. And also, for all the good and bad that we can say about the internet and, everything being digital, the beauty of it was that I could then go and I could start to read neuroscience papers that, like 30 years ago, how could you ever, you'd read something in a book and that book would be already 2 years old. And then they would quote some sort of what am I trying to say? A PhD thesis or some esoteric. And how would you ever find that? You couldn't. But now I would read an article and it would quote other articles, and literally within 3 minutes, I could be reading it online, the original source material. And that was just fascinating. In fact, I'll tell you something interesting. At one point, I thought, when I was writing Wired for Story, I thought, well, I want to see what's being taught out there in cognitive psychology. Like, what are they actually teaching? So I ponied up and I bought a textbook, and they're expensive.
Yes, they are. Yes.
It's like $150 for this textbook, but I go, okay, I'm going to take a look. And here's the really interesting thing. I was reading it, and the information in it was literally 10 years out of date. 10 years out of date. I was reading things where I knew I had just read a study that completely debunked what I was reading. So it was just, we can be on the cutting edge at this point. So, that was basically it. And I knew that when it came to writing and writers, I was teaching something that was the opposite of what everybody else was teaching. And I felt, and I'm not shy about saying this, and I say this to writers all the time, that everything you know about writing, everything you know about story is wrong, because it's taught wrong everywhere. And so that's what, led me to write the book. Led my wonderful editor at the time at 10 Speed to go, yeah, I want this book. And that's what sort of catapulted me out there, because when the first one came out, Wired for Story, which was 2012, so it's 8 years ago, just about now, not quite. I was on as many business shows as I was on writing shows, because, and this is the thing, story, regardless of the format, regardless of genre, it's not, story in the way that we think of it now, which is kind of a problem, because we tend to think of story as quote unquote soft science, because when you think of stories, you think of novels or TV shows or movies or, that sort of thing, whereas story is really built into the architecture of our brain. It's how we make sense of everything. So any story you hear that anybody tells you is based on this exact same principle, because it's again, it's not theory, it's biological fact. It's how we process information. And the more we can dive into that and understand it, the better you are at, convincing anybody of anything.
It was after I read your first book that I really started I've been a direct response copywriter for over 20 years. And I was always looking for that extra thing that could make me even better. And it was after I read your first book, Wired for Story, that I started to notice and actually pay attention to the conversations, not only that I was having, that everyone was having. And it's always a story. Mm-hmm. Like virtually every time there's a dialogue between two people, they're sharing stories. And that's the communication. And I started looking at commercials on television. And then I started just to look at, not only just TV shows and just all these different things, even on game shows or whatever. And I'm not a television watcher at all. I'm a reader. but it's all story. And then I started to realize, hey, this is really a big deal. This is something I need to learn and really dive into. And then I realized, hey, listen, you know virtually nothing about this. This is a huge topic. So I started looking for, like I said, the people who were the leading experts in the world. That's how I came across you. Just one quick thing I want to say before I jump into my second question. Two things I want to say. First, guys, I don't care if you're aspiring to be a writer or not. All of these principles cross directly over into the business setting because, like the title of her book says, we are all wired for story. And so if you can become a master storyteller, and whether you're going to be writing or using actual stories in the form of oral communication, this is the keys to the kingdom. I'm telling you right now, this is that good. It's really, really good stuff. My second point is this. So again, don't write this off and say, I'm not a writer. Don't check out. This is definitely what you want to know. Secondly, Lisa, you mentioned reading all these manuscripts. This wasn't something I planned, but why not? I've been working on this manuscript. I've been writing by hand now. And I just thought it's the writing's kind of small, and it's in this little, what is this, like a 2.5 by 3 little Missouri Tigers spiral notebook here. So I'm going to send it. I'm just kidding. I was just thinking, I wonder how many people actually ask her, hey, could you look at this manuscript for me? I've been working.
Funny story about that. If you want to just take
Yeah, sure.
I at one point tore the meniscus on my knee. And this was about 10 years ago in a bike accident. And I was going to have it through arthroscopic surgery, like sewn up. And they were putting me out. And the doctor asked me what I did. And at that point, I was a literary agent. And I said, I'm a literary agent. And he said, oh, my mother wrote a novel. Would you mind reading it? And it's like, I'm going, yes, as long as I survive this, I am happy to do it.
Yeah, what are you going to say,
Exactly. That was the strangest moment where someone asked me, would you take a look at this?
Did you take a look at it?
Yeah, it was terrible.
I can imagine. So yeah, tell them after the fact. So yeah. Lisa, the second question that I like to ask all of our guests is, do you have any mentors, or do you have any experiences, or anything that may have happened to you in your life that really shaped your decision and your path to go in the direction that you've gone on now? Something maybe that really inspired you or motivated you?
Well, I would say two things. The first thing was just being annoyed at the writing world. I mean, I did it to get into what I got into. I did not. I did everything completely by myself. Largely because when I feel like I'm really right about something and I get a lot of pushback, if I really feel like I'm right after I listen to everything, I push really hard. So seeing that I really felt like everything that was taught out there was wrong, it galvanized me to go out and kind of bit by bit do this on my own. And I would kind of try to bring in, partners, people who could do it. And I didn't find anyone else with the same fire under them. So I ended up really, truly just doing it myself over the period of about 20 years, really coming to where I am now. So on that level, no, it was just internal anger about, if once I knew something, if someone was going to say something that was the opposite, I would marshal everything so I could prove them wrong 6 ways from Sunday. I mean, I could go on and on and on, and often do. And so there was that part of it. But in terms of the business part, and in terms of the really trying to figure out how to take it out into the world and what to focus on, I do have a mentor and someone who I think is fabulous. And you've actually come across her work because it's within Story Genius, and her name is Jenny Nash. And she is amazing. We both taught at UCLA Extension in the writers program. And when you were in the writers program, you could take each other's courses for free. And so she took a course I had online, and I hadn't written anything yet. I wanted to write Wired for Story, and she had written a bunch of novels. And I said, God, yeah, I'd like to, but I kind of need a coach. And she said, oh, I'll coach you. I could do that. And that changed both our lives, because she is now this uber writing coach. She's got a company called Author Accelerator. She now trains other people to be coaches to help other writers. And she is so good and so focused on the business part of it, which completely is not my skill set at all. I mean, I couldn't be less. So yeah, without her, the second book, Story Genius, I wrote it because my editor at 10 Speed said, she said, I was thinking of writing a novel, and I went to look for books on how to do it, like how to outline or how to go in and start, and there was nothing. Do you want to write one? And I was like, okay, I think I could do that. But the reason I could is because the minute I wrote Wired for Story and I wanted to sit down and go, just kind of bask in it's done and it's out there, that feeling where you think, I can relax for a minute. And the first thing Jenny said to me was, okay, now you've got the theory. How are you going to go out and teach that? What are you going to do? What's your method going to be? What is that? And she didn't let me rest until I came up with a method. And then that became, a couple years later, that became Story Genius. So yeah, big shout out to Jenny. She has got the drive that I would give. I feel the same thing about her as I do about Stephen King. If I found out they were from a different planet, I'd be relieved because I don't know how anybody can do so much so quickly, so well.
I read his book, is it called On Writing or something like that, many years ago. Many years ago, when people were telling me, hey, there's to be a good copywriter, you got to be able to write. That's when I first started hearing about story and things like that. And I'm like, well, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It was just a whole different style. But the more advanced I get at doing this, the more I realize that this is everything. This is the foundation. This is all of it. If you can write or tell a good story, you can accomplish virtually anything. And I mean that literally. I was thinking the other night, and I don't remember the gal's name, but I was reading her work. She outlines the 6 different types of stories. You're probably familiar with her. And I don't know what it was, but it just struck me. And I'd actually been reading, I read through again, Wired for Story, some of the information in that, and then also the second book. But it just struck me that story, and I just want to get your comment on this. My vision of what a story is, correct me if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm right. I don't know either way, but just how I see it as from a business perspective, this is a powerful tool where I can literally, if I'm good at it and I know how to do it, I can take my prospect, the person that I'm communicating with, I can take them, it's a tool that allows me to literally take them to a place, not literally, but figuratively, take them to a real place that exists in between their ears where they can see and experience the same emotions that I am or the emotions that I want them to. I can shape the entire experience. Now, they might have different thoughts than I do or whatever else, because that's just the nature of people. We all have our map of the world that exists prior to reading a story. So 10 people could read a story and see it, get the 10 different things from, this was most meaningful to me out of the story. But for all intents and purposes, it's a tool where I can literally, figuratively speaking, transport my prospect to a place where I have this ability to help shape their emotions and how they see things so they can see exactly what I'm seeing, what I want them to see. So whether it's the benefits of what I'm trying to get them to invest in, a feeling I want them to have. And when I really saw that for the first time, I'm like, this is really, I don't believe in magic, but it's almost like magic that you could have a tool like this. And so that's why it's really important to me to learn this. And the more I learn, the less I realize that I understand this process. And that's why I'm really glad you're on the show today. So based on what I just said, what are your thoughts on that? Expand on it, cut it apart, whatever you want to do with it. I want to know if I'm on the right trail with this.
Yeah, 100%. The difference between a story that is in a novel or a memoir or a television show is that at the end of the day, to some degree, you can take it, like you said, and you're going to one thing, believe another thing. But basically, all stories make a point. All stories make a point, and they begin making that point from the very first word. When you're writing a story to convince someone of something, that is what you want them to walk away with. They might have slightly different thoughts, but you want to take them through something so at the end of the day, they not only hear your call to action, but they really feel like it's their idea. They really feel like that's something that they want to do and that it makes them be, and this is such an overused term and it's general, and I don't like generalities at all, but just for the sake of brevity, it makes them feel like their most authentic self. You've tapped into something in them that makes them feel like, to be myself, this is what I want to do. And then they're taking your idea out as if it was their own and they're trumpeting it. But the difference is when you're writing a story to change how somebody else sees something is that you have to really understand them to begin with, and their mindset to begin with. And then you will craft the story in order to, speaking to their own story. In other words, if your story doesn't speak to their story, you're going to just alienate them, because you're going to say things, or things are going to happen, and they are just going to feel like, okay, my tribe wouldn't do that, or that I'm turned off to that, and they're going to just shut you down and argue back. If you've told a story, and this is why so much work has to be done before you can create it. It's not about just showing them how great your product is, or your idea is, or what you want them to do is, because they don't care. I mean, the irony is when you're telling somebody a story, because we come to every story, any kind of story, unconsciously, in our cognitive unconscious, asking this one question, which is, what am I going to learn here that's going to help me better make it through the night? What am I going to learn? And so you have to tailor what you're saying to a story that they can, or an experience that jives with the way that they see the world and the way they see themselves. And then at the end of the day, they come out, something's shifted, because by definition, you're asking them to do something they're not already doing. So you're showing them why this makes them their more authentic self than the way that they were before. And that's why, story is everything. But without that first bit of work, because what story's about, and again, we can get into this in a second, but just a little preview, what story's about, it's not about what happened. Story's not about an external change. Story's about an internal change. When we're tracking the story, we're not tracking the big giant things that are happening, whether they're big, small, or somewhere in between. We're tracking how those big things, how that thing that a person, problem or something a person can't avoid, how that changes how they see things.
Right.
And that is the heart and soul of story. And again, that's something that's simply not taught. And that is the point. And diving into that and creating a story that makes whether you're telling a story about yourself, or you have a main character or protagonist, even if the story is, like 3 or 4 sentences, that's what your audience is tracking, how they are responding to what's happening, why they're responding to it, and what's happening makes them then realize as a result, and how that then causes them to take, hopefully, the action that you want them to take.
I think that's, you said a couple different things there that were just right on, but coming from a different angle from what I do. First of all, NLP, I talked about the map of the world. So you have to know, this is where coming in to know your perfect prospects, your map, their map, understanding them. It's not about you. It's about them, really. So having that intimate knowledge of your perfect prospects, what's going to appeal to them, their backstory, so on and so forth. But then also you talked about internal decisions. So they come to the realization that, hey, this is a decision I've made on my own. Those are the decisions that stick. An internal decision, that's one of the reasons why I'm an absolute advocate and a fan and a proponent, an outspoken one, for utilizing outcome-based video testimonials in your business, because people are sharing their story, and those people oftentimes share a similar backstory to the people who are watching them, whether you're a dentist, a chiropractor, a consultant, an author, whatever. Like the people who read your books, that's your tribe. So if you had some of your people give testimonials about the books they read, that you wrote, and how it changed them and what they benefited and what they got out of it, that's going to really resonate with the other people who are just like them, versus if you came out and said, my books are great, my books are this and my books are that, and you could be telling the truth.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Right. And so when we brag, people don't have the ability to come, and when I say brag, when we're truthfully sharing about our work, people don't accept that, at least in my experience and from what I understand. It's much more difficult for them to it's much more difficult for you to stimulate or trigger the internal decision process in their minds versus through story, which is another avenue to do this, which is you're the master of, or by having other people share their experiences, because then the people listening or watching those videos, the outcome-based video testimonials, i.e. social proof, can see themselves. They're listening to those stories, and there's an element of story in every one of these testimonial videos, which I never understood that until reading your work, but all I know is it works. It's like magic. You want to sell more stuff? Let your clients sell it for you. Let your customers, your patients, they don't have to be salesmen. Just let them share their stories, because everybody is wired for story, like you've said. So did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just one thing to kind of also hit hard on if you say how great what you're doing is, even if you're 100% right, 100%, and you could back it up and prove it. So you're just going to say it. When we hear a story anybody's story, the first place the mind goes is to what is the agenda of the main character. And if that's you, and you're telling somebody about how great what you're doing is, we're thinking, what's your agenda? And what we think is, well, your agenda is to sell me something.
Right.
So if that's your agenda, that means that I don't know if I can believe everything that you're saying, because your agenda isn't to be truthful. Your agenda, which isn't to say that you're not, but it's you've got a vested interest in what happens. So we're much less likely to believe someone who has a vested interest than we are in somebody who's just saying, this helped me so much. So yeah, I'd be very careful, because the other problem that people have when they say how great what they've done is, or how great their product or what, is that they're saying why it's great in their opinion. And other people might think it's great for a completely other reason. I mean, we make that mistake all the time, is we think that the way that we see the world is how everybody sees the world. So if we think it's great, and the reasons why we're looking for something, we've done something and we think it's good, might be the exact opposite, or even something that your audience doesn't care about. I've seen a lot of fundraising letters. I remember seeing one in particular. It was for an aquarium, and the letter was, we're really going to make this aquarium better, and we feel it's going to be so great because we're going to love it, and we're going to bring more people in, and we're going to feel. And the reader's thinking, well, I don't care what you feel.
Yeah.
I feel, and you're so focused on you, you're turning me off.
Absolutely.
Really comes back to, but it takes a lot, as you probably say, it takes a lot of work, before you have a testimonial of somebody saying, why something was great, to really figure out both how your audience sees the world, the reason why they're not doing what you already want them to do, because there's some sort of a reason, there's something. And then what can you do, or what can you show them that's going to undo that without, and this is the real danger, without stepping on some deeply held belief that's only going to make them, like be your enemy and not listen to you, and perhaps even rail against you, or basically want to punch you in the nose. That really is so key. That's what my new book is about, actually, is all of this. I've been spending a lot of time diving into exactly that.
Okay, so I'm going to go off script here. And when I say go off script, I'm going to leave my questions for just a minute. I want to make one comment. I want to ask you about your new book for just a second, but I want to make this one comment, because I think I told you I was in a head-on collision with a dump truck back in 1994, 18 surgeries, major brain injuries. That's one of the things, again, that led me to wanting to learn more about my brain. But having said that, you mentioned if you don't do this right, you could actually have people wanting to punch you in the nose and end up hating you. Well, I don't want people to end up wanting to punch me in the nose, or I don't want people to, hate on me. But I will say this. I intentionally craft my copy and the way I talk and the way I package myself and the work that I do to intentionally repel certain people. I'll give you an example. The people that I want to repel are people that they're not willing to do hard work. I don't want to work with people, and I want to repel those people who are always looking to blame others and never accept responsibility for themselves. I want to repel people who like to complain and gripe and things like that, and who aren't thankful for the help that they get or the things that you do for them. So that's just like a small snippet of the people. So I intentionally, and I think you're shaking your head vehemently, yes. So yeah, I go out of my way to repel people who are of a certain bent. I just don't want to work with them. I don't care what their politics are, but they got to be like decent, hardworking people. If somebody's dishonest, I fire clients from time to time, and I work with 6-figure clients. So this is a big decision when I fire someone. And I just recently had to fire someone who I personally, on a personal level, I like all of the people I work with. I really like them. And I feel like I don't want to work with someone who I couldn't be friends with, but I don't typically establish friendships with my clients on a real personal, deep level. I mean, I can be very friendly with them. I can do things with them. This was a person I felt like could be a very good friend of mine. And this person lied to me not only once, but twice over something they didn't have to lie about. And I had to end up firing them. And it was actually hurtful to me. And, people were like, you're absolutely nuts. You know how much money you just walked away from? I don't care. I got to be able to wake up in the morning and feel good about what I'm doing and who I'm working with. And if I feel like I'm working with someone who, is an example, I had one guy a long time ago tell me that he was cheating on his wife. I couldn't keep working with him. I didn't want to be involved with someone. I thought, if you'll cheat on and be dishonest and take advantage and do somebody that bad, who's supposed to be the closest person to you on the earth, what are you going to do to me?
Yeah.
What are you doing to your clients? And so I just don't want to work with people like that. So I'm glad you brought that up. But now that I've kind of got that mantra out of the way, what's up with the new book? Because this has got me like, I want an advanced copy. I mean, when it's done, I would love it if I could. Robbie Kelman Baxter just gave me an advanced copy of her book. It just launched this week. So hopefully I think that's going really, really well. But if you have an advanced copy, 100%. I would love to get a hold of that for selfish reasons, obviously, full disclosure, and then promote the heck out of it. I mean, I will promote the heck out of your books. In fact, I'm guaranteeing your books, if anybody buys, they will buy your books. Guys, if you want to become a master storyteller, I'll just get this out of the way. Buy either Wired for Story or Story Genius. Use the stuff that's in them. I don't care if you're going to be a writer, to use this in business. Mm-hmm. You will greatly, greatly improve your story selling skills, your storytelling skills, and make a lot more money and have a lot happier clients. And if you don't, after using these, if you can't say that, email me and I will buy one or both of those books from you. I'm guaranteeing fully the efficacy and the effectiveness and the just the brilliance of these two books. I want to get that out of the way. So tell us about your third book, because I just can't wait to hear about it.
Okay, the third book, and it's funny because what you just said, I have a section in it that almost verbatim says what you just said, figuring out who you don't want to work with. But it's called, at least at this moment, it's called Story or Die: How to Use Brain Science to Create Your Own Story to Persuade, Convince, and Inspire. And it really is story for the business world, the nonprofit world, even if you're trying to convince your team not to text and drive world. In other words, all of us.
Right.
And so that's what it goes into. It goes into the same brain science. In some ways, it goes slightly deeper than the other books because more stuff has happened since I wrote them. And because I really want to make the point, I would say a third of it really goes deeply into the brain science of how we make decisions, why we make the decisions we do, why we pay attention to some people and not, literally how we're wired to make sense of things, and literally why, and I think this is really important for everybody, why it is that we'll fight back. Why it is that we are so wired to be tribal. And I don't mean that pejoratively at all, but we are wired that way, and there's no way to undo that wiring. So understanding the way that our wiring is sort of pushing us, and understanding the way that we're wired, so how your audience might be hearing what you're saying and why they feel that way, not because they're stubborn or willful or just ignorant, but because it's literally how they've been wired since they were very small. So understanding that both helps you understand everybody in your life, actually, but also people who you are trying to persuade or convince to, hire you or buy something that you've done. And it also helps you understand how you make decisions, because stories basically, have an effect on us. Every story you hear affects you in one way or another, whether you're aware of it or not. And the scary thing is, usually we're not aware of it. So it really goes into that brain science. It goes into why facts don't really grab us, why facts literally will not convince anybody of anything unless it plugs into a story they've already got.
Right.
Why? And this is the other big thing, that what story does is story takes, big, dry facts, abstract concepts, abstract or vague ideas, and it translates them into something really, really specific, so that your prospect, so that it can affect you in the one biological system by which we make every decision that we ever make. And this might come as a big surprise, but that's emotion. Emotion is a biological system, and it's not like reason versus emotion at all. They are flip sides of the same coin. And actually, the truth is that if you couldn't feel emotion, you couldn't make a single rational decision.
Right.
Emotion has gotten such a bad rap. It is not, it tends to be brought down to the term, which is used pejoratively, emotional, as if that is a bad thing. And you want to make a decision, you're gonna marshal all the facts, figures, data, and you're gonna analyze it dispassionately in the cold light of objective reason. And
doesn't happen.
Right. And we're told when we do that, what you want to do is you want to keep emotion at bay, because it's going to creep in and cloud your judgment. And the truth is, emotion is your judgment. In other words, emotion is the way that we took information in, and then that emotion slams into you and lets you know the meaning of things. And the meaning of things isn't something that we have a priori or that we all see the same meaning. We all see meaning in things and read meaning into things based on one thing and one thing alone. And that's what our past experience has taught us. And so each of us, I mean, if you look at how, and how can you not, how completely polarized this country is at the moment, and you can look at any one thing happening and you have two groups coming at it and reading the exact opposite meaning into it. No meaning comes a priori. It comes from what our tribes have taught us when we're tiny, when we're trying to figure out how the world works. Because biologically, that's what we needed to do, back in the day. But back in the day, the world was obviously far simpler. We're wired to live in a world that we don't live in anymore. So now there's just so much to deconstruct. So basically, that's what the book is about. It dives into that so we really have a deep understanding of the way that, literally the way the brain works and the way that people are making decisions. And then that goes into the next section is literally on trying to figure out who your audience is, how they see the world, and how you can then make your point given the way that they see the world. And the point is, of course, your call to action. And then the last section of the book is how to create a story, and given those parameters. And then we go through, so if you were looking to create a story, whether it's an ad, whether it's a donation letter, whether it's literally trying to get your kid to stop texting and driving, please don't text and drive, it will take you through writing your own story, creating your own story for that. And again, when I say story, and that's what I said originally, I don't mean a big, long saga, or novel. I mean, literally just, what you might say. It could be a 15-second spot. It could be it could be, 3 sentences. It could be a tweet. It could be a text.
You talked about, it sounds almost like in a very roundabout way, in certainly a much more sophisticated way. You're talking about all the things that the tribal experience we've gone through has literally, it sounds like imprinting what I used to do with my, what I do with my young horses. When I have a horse, a mare, and I get a colt or, a little filly colt or stud colt out of them, I imprint those horses, meaning I go in and grab them, their ears, and get them used to being touched and handled so that when they weigh 1,200 pounds, they don't hurt me because they're very skittish animals. And so on a much more sophisticated level, we're talking about human imprinting that occurs just through the experience of being human and living in the tribe of people or around the different types of people, the environments where we've grown up. And so that's something people don't consider, but it's really relevant. It's very, very important. And emotion really, I think the first time I really understood this, and like I said, it was a superficial understanding, but you really opened my eyes when I read Wired for Story. I interviewed a guy named, I forgot his name, it's Paul something. When I first started this podcast, his company's name is Emotive Analytics. And he was telling me then, he's a researcher. He does, for Fortune 500 companies, he does research on emotional triggers that get people to buy more stuff. But he's like, it's emotion. It's all emotion. It's all emotion. And at the time, I'm like, okay, whatever. And the more I read, and after reading your work, I'm, man, this is pure genius. This is stuff I have to learn. So let's do this just for the sake of time. Yeah. How you doing on time?
I'm fine. Okay,
cool. So am I. I'm not, I just want to make it, I may split this into 2 episodes. I may not, I'm not sure yet, but let's do this, kind of split this into 3 segments. If we could take the first part of the conversation from here moving forward, let's talk about kind of what a story is, what it's not. And then from there, we'll talk about a little more brain science. And then the third part, we'll talk about some applications that could be made in the business setting, So if you could, what is a story? Tell us what exactly a story is, because I think a lot of people they share information thinking they're telling a story when in fact they're sharing an experience possibly, but it's not a story.
Right. I'm going to give you, to talk about it, let me just give you the same thing I would say to writers and move into that, just because we can go.
Yeah.
So the story is about what happens. Now, what happens is the plot. It's the surface of the story, is that event that is going to take place. And as I say to writers, if I leave you with nothing, it would be this. The story is not about the plot. The story is not about a thing that happens. That's why it was up to me, and this is incendiary both literally and figuratively, I would take every story structure book, and I know that in business they use this often, starting with a hero's journey on up, and I would burn them. Because for one thing, it's a misnomer. It's not story structure, it's plot structure. And it implies that if you come up with a bunch of things that happen, then you have a story. And you don't. You absolutely don't. So it's how what happens affects someone. That someone is the protagonist. It's the person that the story is happening to. It is, if you're telling a story about yourself, it's you. You know, as we probably all know, when you're telling stories in the business world, very often the protagonist actually is your audience. You know, they are the people that it's going through, even though the protagonist in any story is, in fact, an avatar for, you know, for your audience. Yes. So how it happens is the plot affects someone. That is your protagonist, your avatar, your audience, in pursuit of a difficult goal. And that is something they often call the story question or the plot problem. They've been putting through something difficult, and the story is about change. And here's the thing. All change is hard. That's why when you ask someone in the business world or any world to change, you're asking them to do something we're wired not to do. We're wired to really, as much as possible, stand pat, because even if we're in a bad situation, that's why we stick with the devil you know, right?
It's predictable.
Right. We know how to deal with it. It could be worse out there. Mm-hmm. So it's about how somebody deals with something difficult, that plot problem. So it's how what happens, that's the plot, affects someone. That's the character. That's who we're really identifying with. As I said earlier, they've done fMRI studies that show when you're lost in the story, same areas of your brain light up that would light up if you were doing what that character is doing. And what you're looking for is why they're doing it. Who is this person? First thing we look for in a story. Who is the main character? And when I say story, again, to be really clear, this was from research done with somebody reading just headlines. You know, who is this about? What are they feeling? What do they want? What's their motive? You know, what's going on here? So we have a context to make sense of this big thing that's happening. So it's again, I know I'm getting ahead of myself. How what happens is the plot to someone, that's the main character, in pursuit of a difficult goal. That is the thing that they are being forced to deal with. They've been knocked out of their comfort zone. And now this is the key point. And how they change internally as a result. And that, my friends, is what your story is about. Story is not about an external change. Story is about an internal change. It's about how what happens externally forces this person to change how they see things internally, either then to realize how to solve the problem or to realize that the problem was something very different than what they thought it was, to see that differently. And that's what story is about. Story is about an internal change. And here's the key thing, and why coming at story starting at the first, you know, if you're doing copywriting, the first moment of that particular story, if you're writing a novel, you know, page 1, is that the story begins long before that, because that character has to come in needing to make a change, and you need to know what that change is. Change from what to what, which goes to all the research that you need to do first, so that you are sure that the character is created so that they need to make that change, and that you want that change to be the change that you want your audience to make. That's why it's so much more goal directed when your story is, you know, copywriting or advertising or commercial or a donation letter or whatever, because you have to understand deeply why that character, what that belief system is that's holding them back from doing it to begin with. And then you have to show them both. This is the tricky part. You have to show them why it's actually holding them back and keeping them from getting what they want. But you have to do that without stepping on such you know, gut level, hard held beliefs that you're going to just alienate them, and they're going to think, oh, you don't know anything about me. You don't know the first thing about me. And then they're going to bail, which is why you really have to understand that. So that's what story is. That's what story does. It takes us, and then in a novel or in a few sentences, scene by scene by scene by scene, it takes us through a character dealing with whatever that problem is. And internally, it makes them struggle with what I call their misbelief. Misbelief being the reason why they're not already doing what it is that you want them to do. And the external makes them struggle with that until finally they see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. Can I put you on the spot here? And if you can do this, great. Yeah. I would love it. And if you can't do it, or we don't have enough time, that's great as well. Can you give us an example of, in a sales setting, and you could sell, I don't care what it is, a car. I mean, not a car. We don't deal with car dealers here or car salesmen. That's a bad example. Whatever. Just a basic sales situation, maybe selling a piece of artwork where someone does it the wrong way, and then how would it be done the right way? And you can make this as overly simplistic as you want to kind of illuminate this in a business setting so we can see this in our mind's eye, if that makes sense.
The easiest way for me to do that, even if you were a writer, you said come up with a story this way or that way without giving me the parameters of what it was. That would be difficult. But what I can do is take one or two. The first one is a very simple one, comes to mind, commercials.
Okay.
And I give you one that does work and one that doesn't work.
Perfect. That works.
Okay. So which do you want first, the one that does or the one that doesn't?
Let's do the one that does not work first.
Okay. I'll tell you the story about this one. Okay. I, like you, I mean, I don't watch much TV, and I admit to not watching commercials in their like actual habitat, environment, meaning, during some sort of show. But I was in a movie theater, and I was watching a movie, and before the movie started, this commercial came on, and it made me so angry, I was screaming at the screen. And later on, I was talking to a business group in Austin, Texas, who asked sort of a similar question that you did. And I said, well, what I just said, I don't watch much, but I did see this. I talked about this commercial, and everybody went, and one guy in particular went, oh my God, yes, I had that exact, my wife walked out. She was so angry. Because it really is deeply, it just doesn't work. And it's a commercial for Diet Coke. So let me see if I can get this exactly right. So it's a very pretty woman, and she's very thin, and she walks sort of into this, like a bodega, and she takes this Coke out, and she goes, Diet Coke. I drink it because I can. I drink it because it's delicious. And if someone tells, oh God, wait, hold on one second. I'm going to take one more second because one more time I want to get the rest of the commercials. I'm going to bring my laptop over here so I can see this down here while I'm doing it.
You can play the commercial if you want. I mean, if you have it up, cue it up.
I don't know. I mean, I certainly could cue it up. Hold on, but can I cue it? I don't know how to do that on this.
It's fine. I'll find the commercial on my end. So if you want to play it on yours, and then I'll just have it edited in.
Okay, hold on. Okay, here it is. I've watched this commercial a bazillion times. So do you want me just to play the audio of it right now?
Sure, if you want to, yeah.
Okay, so I can totally do that. Let me be sure this is as loud as it gets. And you might have seen this one. So let's see, is it going to start at the beginning?
Look, here's the thing about Diet Coke. It's delicious. It makes me feel good. Life is short. If you want to live in a yurt it up. If you want to run a marathon, I mean, that sounds super hard, but okay. I mean, just do you, whatever that is. And if you're in the mood for a Diet Coke, have a Diet Coke. Diet Coke. Because I can.
Okay. And that's the commercial.
People get paid to write that?
That's the commercial. The problem with it is she sounds utterly defensive from the get-go. It's like she's arguing with someone who's told her, you shouldn't drink Diet Coke. It's really bad for you. So she's saying, yeah, because I can, because it's delicious. If you want to, you can drink it. So already we're thinking, why is she so defensive? Who is she arguing with? And then when she says, if you want to live in a yurt it up, and you're thinking, is somebody say something bad about yurts too? Like, is there some anti-yurt movement? And then she goes into and if you want to run a marathon, I mean, that sounds super hard, but go ahead. Again, not only does she sound defensive, but she sounds like she's about to say how hard math is at that point. And then when she says, just be whoever it is, I don't think it's just do you.
Right.
It sounds like something you should probably do with the shades down behind closed doors. Like, what does she even mean? Again, it sounds like she's giving you permission to do something that someone has told you not to do. I think they pulled it down. It got a lot of social media did not like it. It did not do well at all. But I think that's a commercial that really, really doesn't work because it sounds defensive. It sounds like they're arguing against somebody who's already told you not to do something. And so when you're pulled into it, you're thinking, instead of thinking, well, yeah, okay, good. She's giving me permission to drink Diet Coke. You're thinking, maybe there's some reason why I shouldn't. Because why is she sounding that way?
Right.
The fact that she's also stick thin, and you think, why does she even need to drink a Diet Coke? So that would be one that absolutely doesn't work. There's another one that doesn't work that was literally pulled down right when social media was first taking off. It was a Motrin commercial.
Mm-hmm.
It was just graphics. Basically, it implied it was when women started to wear babies in slings and in backpacks, and it implied, and it was about backaches, like, because granted, if you have a baby in a sling or a backpack, it might hurt your back. but the ad went on to say that the reason that women were wearing babies that way was because it was a fashion statement, because it made them feel like a real mom. It was like immediately pulled back. I mean, it was really one of those ads where you think, okay, the person who wrote this was definitely not a mom with a baby in a sling. So, I mean, social media, it's funny when you go back and read the articles about it at the time, because social media was so new that it took so little to pull it down, because that's all there was.
Right.
But those would be two where they really did not know their audience. They really, one sounded defensive, one just clearly didn't know. And, I was reading some of the tweets that went through, and one woman had tweeted, this is so offensive that even my husband hated it and thought, what's wrong with them? It was just, definitely
arrogant, condescending, out of touch, superficial. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
But it was like they were looking at what they thought, and
they don't value their audience enough to do the research.
Right. And I think that's really again, to do the research, but also I think even when you do the research, you still have to step out of the notion that the way that you see it,
right,
is what it is. And that is really hard, not because, we're jerks or stubborn or purposely arrogant, but because it's like that old David Foster Wallace. Do you know he did this really wonderful thing. It was a commencement speech, and there's a really wonderful, like, shortened 9-minute video on it called "This Is Water." Do you know that one?
Off the top of my head, no.
It's really brilliant, but it starts with this. It's I guess an old joke of, like, two young fish are swimming around, and an older fish comes up and says, "Hey guys, how's the water?" And they just look, and then the fish swims away, and one fish turns to the other and goes, "What's water?" And we don't realize that the way that we see the world is the water that we're swimming in, as opposed to the way things really are.
Right.
Our water is what we've been wired to see, and the meaning that we've been wired to read into things, the meaning that we write into things comes from us. It isn't in that thing itself.
Right. NLP, the map is not the territory. It's the map. It's what we perceive of our environment. It's not the reality of the environment. It's our interpretation of the experiences we've had within that. That's basic. That's high level copywriting stuff, but I guess that's pretty relevant to story as well.
Oh, 100%. Because that's what you need to know. If you're writing a novel, you need to know that about every character you've got. Like, why are they doing what they're doing? And it always goes much deeper than what it looks like on the surface.